You won't believe what I saw the moment I pulled up to my lake cabin that Friday afternoon. Normally when I drive out here, I expect peace and quiet, the kind of silence that comes only from the water gently lapping against the shore and the sound of birds calling through the tall pines. But this time, instead of tranquility, I was greeted with something that made me slam on my brakes in shock. Hanging across the front gate of my private cabin was a giant white banner with bold red letters that read, "Welcome guests. Weekend lake retreat starts here." My first thought was that I must have taken a wrong turn, maybe somehow ended up at a nearby campground. But no, this was my gate, my land, my private sanctuary. I sat there behind the wheel of my truck for a few seconds just staring at the banner in disbelief, trying to process what was happening. And then I noticed the cars. Not one or two, but rows of them already lined up on both sides of the narrow road leading to my property. SUVs with kayaks strapped to the top, minivans packed with coolers, sedans with trunks popped open while people unloaded lawn chairs, beach balls, and even massive plastic tubs of food. Strangers were laughing, waving to each other, and heading toward my cabin as if they owned the place. The sound of upbeat music drifted through the air, and I swear I even saw a group of kids running across my lawn chasing each other with water balloons. I rolled my window down and leaned out, calling to the nearest person. She was a woman balancing a tray of cupcakes, smiling from ear to ear like she was arriving at the best party of the summer. "Hey, excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "what's going on here? Why are you on this property?" She beamed back at me and answered without a hint of hesitation, "We're here for the HOA Lake Retreat. Karen said the cabin owner generously offered his place for us this weekend. Isn't this just amazing?" My stomach dropped. Karen. Of course it was Karen. The self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood and the president of the HOA who had been making my life miserable since the day I bought the cabin. She'd been harassing me for months, insisting that my property was under HOA rules even though I had legal proof that it wasn't. I had ignored her ridiculous letters, her threats of fines, and her fake violation notices, thinking eventually she would get tired of bothering me. But now she had taken it to a level I never imagined possible. She had actually claimed my private cabin as the venue for her event, and she had lured dozens of people here under false pretenses. I drove slowly forward, weaving through the chaos until I reached the gate. People waved at me cheerfully, some calling out things like, "Hey, glad you could make it," or, "You picked the perfect spot for the retreat," as if I were part of their group. Every cheerful face only made me more furious. My private getaway had turned into a circus, and the ringleader was none other than Karen. I unlocked the gate, drove my truck inside, and then immediately locked it shut behind me, trapping my vehicle safely inside the property. I climbed out, heart pounding, and stormed up to the porch where I knew she'd be. And sure enough, there she was. Karen stood proudly at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, barking out instructions like a general commanding her troops. She was telling people where to put the coolers, which cars to park in the driveway, and even pointing at my backyard as the perfect spot for tents. When she finally noticed me, she didn't look guilty. She didn't look scared. She just looked annoyed, like I was interrupting her big moment. "Oh, you're early," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Don't worry, we'll clean up by Sunday night. You should be honored that your cabin was chosen for the community's biggest event." I felt my jaw tighten so hard it hurt. Honored? This woman had trespassed, lied to an entire group of people, and essentially stolen my property for the weekend, and she thought I should be honored? My hands were shaking with anger as I looked around at the crowd, realizing just how many strangers were swarming my land. Every inch of the driveway and yard was filled with people hauling gear, talking, laughing, and settling in like this was some kind of summer camp. I took a step toward Karen and said through gritted teeth, "This is my private property. You had no right to invite anyone here. Everyone needs to leave right now." She rolled her eyes and smirked, the way only Karen could. "Relax," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. We're all neighbors here. This benefits the whole community. I promised everyone you'd cooperate. We've got over 100 guests coming tonight. Food trucks will park along your driveway, and oh, don't worry about bathrooms. We rented portable toilets. They'll be set up behind your shed. I nearly laughed at the absurdity, but it wasn't funny. It was outrageous. Portable toilets on my property? Food trucks blocking my driveway? Strangers trampling my lawn? My cabin wasn't some public venue, it was my home. Yet Karen was treating it like her personal clubhouse. I stared at her, stunned by her arrogance. The audacity it must take to just seize someone's land and declare it the community's party spot was beyond imagination. My blood boiled hotter with every passing second. This wasn't just an annoyance anymore. This was trespassing, theft of privacy, and an outright scam. I tried one last time to reason with her, raising my voice so the crowd could hear. Listen to me, all of you. This is not a retreat. This is my private cabin. You have been lied to. None of you were invited, and you all need to leave immediately. Instead of listening, the crowd murmured angrily. A man with a fishing pole muttered, "Come on, don't ruin the weekend." A woman balancing a picnic basket shook her head and said, "Karen said you agreed to this. Don't be selfish." The more I insisted, the more they looked at me like I was the villain, like I was ruining their fun. And Karen, of course, fed that narrative with her smug grin. I could feel the rage rising in my chest. Karen wasn't just trespassing, she had turned me into the bad guy on my own property. She wagged her finger in my face and sneered, "You need to calm down. This property is part of the HOA Lake Plan whether you like it or not. If you don't like the rules, maybe you should sell." That was the final straw. My patience snapped like a dry twig. I pulled out my phone right then and there, looked her square in the eye, and said, "I'm calling the cops." And the second I started dialing, the smugness faded from her face. For the first time that day, I saw something new in her eyes, panic. I stood there gripping my phone, the call already ringing through to the sheriff's office, and the change in Karen's expression was priceless. For a split second her confidence cracked, but just as quickly she plastered on that fake HOA president smile, the one she always used to mask her schemes. "You don't want to do that," she hissed under her breath, trying to keep her voice low so the crowd wouldn't hear. "If you call the cops, you'll look like the bad guy. Everyone here believes you agreed to this. Do you really want to be the villain in front of 100 neighbors?" Her attempt at intimidation only made my blood run hotter. I didn't care about looking like the villain. This was my land, my cabin, and my rights were not up for debate. I told the dispatcher calmly but firmly, "This is a private property trespassing situation. At least 50 people on my land right now, maybe more." They were told I gave permission, but I did not. "I need officers out here immediately." As soon as I hung up, Karen turned to the crowd and raised her voice like a politician on stage. "Don't listen to him," she announced. "He's just trying to stir up drama. The police won't do anything because this cabin is part of our HOA, and I already filed all the paperwork." People nodded, reassured by her lies. Someone shouted from the driveway, "See? He's just being dramatic." Another chimed in, "We all paid for this retreat, we're not leaving." Paid? That caught me off guard. I realized then just how far Karen had taken this scam. She hadn't just invited people, she had charged them. She'd actually collected money from families, promising them a weekend getaway at a lake cabin that wasn't hers to offer. I turned back to her, furious. "You scammed these people? You actually charged them to be here?" Karen crossed her arms and sneered. "It's called community fundraising. Something you clearly don't understand. We all chip in, and everyone benefits. You should be thanking me for increasing the value of your property by involving it in HOA activities. The audacity of her words nearly made me laugh, but the crowd didn't seem to find it funny. A couple nearby, holding fishing poles and a tackle box, suddenly looked uneasy. "Wait," the man asked, "are you saying he never agreed to this?" Karen brushed him off, but the seed of doubt was planted. More people started glancing at me, whispering among themselves. I raised my voice so everyone could hear me clearly. "Let me make this crystal clear. I never gave permission. I never signed anything. You've all been lied to. And you should know, law enforcement is already on the way. If you don't want to be here when they arrive, I suggest you leave right now." That caused a ripple of unease across the yard. Some people shifted uncomfortably, others muttered angrily under their breath, but Karen wasn't about to let her grip on the situation slip. She marched right up to me, standing so close I could smell the perfume she drowned herself in, and jabbed her finger at my chest. "You think you're so clever, but you're just a stubborn man living in denial. This lake belongs to the community, not to selfish outsiders like you. Once the HOA board finalizes its expansion, you'll have no choice but to follow our rules. I'm simply getting ahead of the curve." Her arrogance was beyond anything I'd seen. She genuinely believed she could bully me into surrendering my property. But what she didn't realize was that her lies were starting to unravel right in front of her. A man in a red baseball cap raised his voice from the back of the crowd. "Karen, we paid you $300 for this weekend. If he never agreed to it, what exactly did we pay for?" That set off a wave of grumbling. More and more people began demanding answers, shouting over each other, glaring at Karen. She stammered, trying to regain control. It's part of the HOA activity fund. None of you need to worry about the details. I have everything under control." But her control was slipping fast. A woman holding a toddler shouted, "We drove 3 hours for this. You said the owner was fine with it. You lied to us." Another man added, "Are we all about to get charged with trespassing because of you?" The once friendly atmosphere had soured into frustration and anger, and all of it was directed at Karen. She turned to me in desperation, her smile strained. "See what you've done? You've ruined everything. If you just cooperated, none of this would have happened." I couldn't believe the nerve of her, blaming me for exposing her lies. I shook my head slowly. "No, Karen. What ruined this was your greed and arrogance. You lied, you trespassed, and you tried to steal my property. Now you're going to face the consequences." I made sure to keep my voice calm and steady, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. That only seemed to make her more furious. She stomped her foot like a child throwing a tantrum. "This isn't over," she snapped. "You'll regret calling the cops. The HOA always wins in the end." But even as she said it, her own guests were beginning to pack up. Families dragged coolers back to their cars, muttering angrily about wasted money and wasted time. A man slammed his trunk shut and shouted across the lawn, "You'll be hearing from me, Karen. I want my money back." Her face turned beet red as the crowd she once controlled started turning against her. And that was when I heard the sound that sealed her fate, the crunch of tires on gravel as 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled up to the gate. Blue lights flashing, engines rumbling, deputies stepping out with serious looks on their faces. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The music cut off, conversations hushed, and every eye turned toward the officers. Karen froze, clipboard clutched tightly in her hands, her lips pressed into a thin line. One of the deputies adjusted his hat and called out, "What's going on here?" His tone wasn't friendly. It was the no-nonsense tone of someone already annoyed to be dragged into a ridiculous situation. I stepped forward, deed and ID in hand, ready to finally put an end to this madness. The deputies walked toward the porch, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone with real authority was here to shut this circus down. One of the deputies, a tall man with a serious expression, held out his hand to me. "Sir, can I see some identification and proof of ownership?" I was more than ready. I handed him my driver's license along with a copy of my property deed that I always kept inside the cabin just in case Karen ever tried pulling something like this. He looked it over carefully, nodded, and then gave me back my documents. "All right," he said firmly, "this is clearly your property. You called us because these people are here without permission?" I answered with a sharp, "Yes, every single one of them." Before I could say more, Karen rushed forward with that fake smile plastered on her face, holding her clipboard like it was some kind of holy scripture. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she began in a dramatic tone. "This man is being very disruptive. He's supposed to be cooperating with our HOA retreat, but instead, he's trying to ruin it for everyone." She thrust the clipboard toward them as if it contained undeniable proof of her claims. The deputy raised an eyebrow and glanced at the papers. After a few seconds of flipping through them, he looked back at her and said flatly, "Ma'am, these are just sign-up sheets and a schedule for a barbecue. There's no legal document here." Karen's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, trying to act indignant. "Well, the HOA board recognizes this property as part of the community." He agreed verbally, and everyone here is a witness. The second deputy, a woman with sharp eyes, stepped closer and crossed her arms. "Ma'am, that's not how property law works. A verbal agreement doesn't override a deed. He owns this land, not you, not the HOA, and certainly not the group of people you invited here." The crowd, which had been shifting uneasily since the deputies arrived, erupted into chatter. Several people started pointing at Karen, demanding answers. One man yelled, "So you lied to us? Again?" Another shouted, "We paid you money, Karen. Are we going to get arrested for this?" Karen's face turned red, and she tried desperately to regain control. "Stop. Everyone calm down. I am the HOA president, and I have the authority to organize events for the benefit of the community." The deputy cut her off sharply. "Not here, you don't. This isn't community property. This is his private residence. What you've done is trespassing, and depending on how you handled these payments, possibly fraud." That last word, fraud, spread through the crowd like wildfire. People began shouting over each other, demanding refunds, some even threatening to call their own lawyers. The once excited party atmosphere had completely collapsed into chaos, and Karen was at the center of the storm. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction as I watched her world unravel. For months she had lorded over everyone with her fake authority, acting like she was untouchable. But now, with deputies standing in front of her and 100 angry neighbors glaring at her, she looked small and desperate. Still, she wasn't about to give up without one last fight. She jabbed her finger toward me and shouted, "He's lying. He's just trying to isolate himself from the community. If you let him get away with this, it'll destroy everything we've built." The male deputy gave her a cold stare. "Ma'am, I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. You are trespassing. Everyone you invited here is trespassing. You have two options: you can clear out immediately, or we can start issuing citations and making arrests. Your choice." The silence that followed was heavy. Then, one by one, people started gathering their belongings. A man folded up his lawn chair with a loud snap. A woman scooped up her toddler and marched toward her car. Someone else muttered angrily about never trusting Karen again. The retreat was unraveling right before her eyes, and Karen knew she couldn't stop it. She stomped her foot, clutching her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Fine," she spat. "But this isn't over. I'll have this cabin under HOA control by the end of the year. You can't stop progress." The deputies weren't having it. The female officer stepped forward and said firmly, "Ma'am, you need to get off this porch right now. If you don't, I'll escort you myself." For a moment I thought Karen might actually resist, but then the weight of the situation seemed to finally sink in. With her pride in tatters, she stormed off the porch, muttering under her breath about how ungrateful everyone was. The crowd parted around her like a tide as she marched toward her car, her once loyal followers now glaring at her with open contempt. The deputies stayed until nearly everyone had cleared out. I watched as car after car pulled away, leaving behind crushed grass, tire marks, and scattered trash across my yard. The deputies turned back to me once the last vehicle was gone. "We'll file a full report," the male deputy assured me. Given the size of this gathering and the money involved, I wouldn't be surprised if she faces more than just a trespassing charge. Fraud and misrepresentation are serious matters. I thanked them, relief washing over me at last. "I appreciate you coming out here. I've been dealing with this woman for months, but this was a whole new level." The female deputy gave me a sympathetic smile. "Some HOA folks think they're above the law. But the law is pretty clear, this is your property, and she had no right to do what she did. I'd recommend installing cameras and maybe a stronger gate. People like her don't always learn the first time." After they left, I stood on the porch looking out at the wreckage. My lawn was littered with paper plates, soda cans, and half-inflated beach toys. There were even footprints leading down to my dock, where someone had clearly tried to set up a fishing station. It was a mess, but it was still my land. My cabin. My safe place. And Karen had failed to take it from me. I took a deep breath, finally feeling the tension start to leave my body. For the first time all day, I could actually hear the sound of the lake again. The chaos was gone, replaced once more by the peace I had come here for. But as I cleaned up the mess, I knew deep down this wasn't the end of Karen. People like her didn't just walk away quietly. She would be back, and next time, she'd probably try something even more outrageous. But now she had crossed a line, and I had the law on my side. I was ready for whatever she tried next. The next morning, I woke up to the quiet hum of the lake, but the memory of the chaos still lingered. My yard looked like a battlefield, crushed grass, muddy tire ruts, paper plates, half-empty soda cans, and even a deflated inflatable flamingo that someone had left behind. It was hard to believe that just 24 hours earlier, there had been nearly 100 strangers trampling across this property as if it were some public park. I spent the first few hours with a trash bag in hand, picking up every leftover piece of evidence from Karen's grand, community retreat. It wasn't just cleaning up a mess, it was reclaiming my space, putting everything back in order. And as frustrating as it was, each bag of garbage I tied up felt like a small victory, a reminder that despite Karen's schemes, I still stood on my land as its rightful owner. By midday, I decided to head into town for supplies. The second I walked into the local hardware store, I noticed people whispering. Normally, folks around here nod politely or maybe say a quick hello, but this time, all eyes seemed to follow me. Finally, one of the clerks came over and said, "Hey, you're the guy with the cabin, right? The one where the HOA president tried to host that big party?" I sighed, realizing the story had already spread like wildfire. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves HOA drama. The clerk shook his head in disbelief. "Man, everybody's talking about it. Some folks are furious at Karen. Heard she charged people to attend. Guess she's in hot water now." That evening, I got a phone call from a neighbor who lived a few miles down the road. He told me the fallout from Karen's stunt was worse than I imagined. Apparently, several families had filed official complaints with the sheriff's office, claiming she scammed them out of hundreds of dollars for an event that didn't exist. Others were demanding refunds, and some even threatened to take her to small claims court. The HOA board, embarrassed by the whole ordeal, had called an emergency meeting to discuss her actions. From what I was told, it wasn't looking good for her position as president. A few days later, I got confirmation. Karen had been voted out as HOA president. The board couldn't defend her after what happened at my cabin. Too many people were angry, and the liability she created was too big to ignore. She lost her title, her influence, and most of her allies in the community. And as if that weren't enough, I heard she might actually face fraud charges for collecting money under false pretenses. The satisfaction I felt when I heard that news was almost indescribable. After months of dealing with her harassment, her fake violation notices, and her endless lectures about community spirit, she had finally been exposed for the fraud she was. But I wasn't content to just sit back and hope she stayed away. I took the deputy's advice seriously. I called a local contractor and had a brand new steel gate installed at the entrance of my driveway, complete with a keypad lock and reinforced hinges. I also put up a large, bold sign that read, "Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted." Just for good measure, I added cameras around the cabin and motion sensor lights that covered every inch of the yard. If Karen or anyone else from the HOA ever tried to step foot on my property again without permission, I'd have evidence to shut them down instantly. The first weekend after everything settled, I finally got what I had wanted in the first place, peace. I sat out on the porch early in the morning with a hot cup of coffee, watching the mist rise off the water as the sun slowly lit up the lake. The only sounds were the chirping of birds and the gentle splash of fish breaking the surface. No music blaring, no strangers wandering around, no Karen barking orders. Just peace. And as I sat there, I realized something important. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting your property. It's about sending a message. Karen thought she could bully me, manipulate me, and use my land to boost her own status. But by shutting the gate, calling the cops, and refusing to back down, showed her, and everyone else, that I wasn't someone to be pushed around. Of course, Karen being Karen, I knew she wasn't going to disappear completely. A few weeks later, I saw her at the local grocery store. She tried to avoid me, ducking into another aisle when she spotted me, but not before I caught the look on her face. She wasn't the smug, confident HOA queen anymore. She looked defeated, bitter, and embarrassed. And honestly, that was enough for me. I didn't need to rub it in. Her own actions had already destroyed her reputation. The community that once saw her as a leader now saw her for what she really was, a liar who thought she could take what didn't belong to her. The funny thing is, some of the very people who were on my lawn that day actually reached out to apologize. A few families wrote me letters saying they were sorry for believing Karen's lies and for trespassing on my property. One family even offered to help repair the damage to my lawn, which I appreciated. It wasn't their fault, they were victims of Karen's scam just like I was. And in the end, the whole ordeal weirdly brought me closer to some of the neighbors I barely knew before. They respected me for standing up to her, and they knew now that I wasn't the selfish outsider she had painted me to be. Looking back, I can't help but smile at the irony. Karen had tried to use my cabin as a way to cement her control over the neighborhood. She thought hosting a grand retreat on my land would make her look powerful and generous. Instead, it exposed her lies, cost her the presidency, and possibly left her facing legal trouble. Meanwhile, I came out stronger, with better security, more respect for my neighbors, and my cabin still firmly in my hands. That night, as I sat on the dock with the stars reflecting off the water, I thought about the words Karen had thrown at me in anger, "You'll regret this." But the truth is, the only one with regrets was her. She regretted underestimating me. She regretted lying to her neighbors. And most of all, she regretted believing that she could steal from someone without facing consequences. As for me, I didn't regret a thing. I shut the gate, I called the cops, and I protected what was mine. And in the end, that's exactly why I won.